Iron Armor Filler Primer. Is it a cost-effective solution for finishing 3D prints, or is it more trouble than what it's worth? We'll put it to the test and find out in today's video. It's coming up next. Bring out the Alright, what's up everyone? Back at it again. It is DW Darkwing Dead, and yes, in today's video we are going to be testing out a product that recently has started hitting the market, making its way through local stores. It is Iron Armor Filler Primer. Now, I really didn't know much about this, but I had some comments from some other subscribers mentioning it, so I figured I'd do some groundwork, see what stores had it, and I went and picked it up. Now, to my surprise, they actually had a sandable filler primer at my local Harbor Freight. So on some of my other tests that I've done specifically with U-Pull, I've seen just how good the sandable primer filled in addition to regular filler primer, so I figured I'd put both of these up and put them to the test. I've had a number of subscribers comment on past videos saying how good this was, so I figured why not give it a shot. We have a pretty good model here that we're going to test it out on. This is just a Jason Voorhees mask. This was printed on my Two Trees SP5 with Sunlu PLA Plus at a 0.2 layer height. Came out pretty good. And I am going to split this right down the middle 50-50 and do the sandable on one side and do the filler primer on the other. We're going to go through my normal post-processing steps and see how well they really do. With all that said and done, let me get some stuff set up. We'll check out these primers and get to work. All right, so it is 1,000 degrees out already. I'm gonna try to get this done as fast as possible. Not too bad of a model. I'm gonna go ahead and sand this with a palm sander, which is 220. I'm gonna get right into applying the filler primer and the sandable primer. So I'm gonna get my sander busted out and start getting this thing knocked out. Let's go. After hitting all the large areas with the palm sander, I went through by hand and just hit all the nooks and crannies up just to make sure they were sanded and prepped. After that, I went and just grabbed some alcohol to remove any dust or debris just to make sure that the primers are going to adhere and bond properly. Before we get spraying these primers, let's just have a quick look at them and go over the instructions and see if there's any differences or variables that might come into factor when testing these head-to-head. First, looking at the filler primer, for the most part, both the filler and the sandable, they say the same thing. They say shake the can for 2 minutes, hold it 10 to 12 inches, 2 minutes, yada, yada. But where things change a little bit here is on the filler primer, it says dry to tack in 15 minutes. Then it continues to say it can be dry or wet sanded at 30 minutes, and it has a full cure in 6 hours. For cooler temperatures, allow more dry time. Big thing here too is it says that it does contain ketones, so make sure that you are wearing proper PPE for this, of course. Moving on to the sandable filler primer. Again, the prep instructions are all the same, but where things change a little bit here on the sandable is it actually says allow 5 to 10 minutes between coats, and it says dry to the touch in 30 minutes, and it has a full cure at 1 hour. Again, saying that if you have cooler temperatures, allow more time. And of course, it does contain acetates and hydrocarbons, so PPE is very important. So, different instructions, very interesting. We will see how much those come into play. With all that said and done, let me show you the model prepped and get spraying these primers. All right, the temperature increased 1,000 degrees. I set my paint booth up here just to, I guess, speed things up. What I'm doing with this is I am doing half of it here completely masked off. I'm gonna spray one side with the sandable, let that dry, and then flip it, and then do the same thing to the other sides. It seems that the filler primer might dry quicker but cure longer, so I don't really think it matters what side I put which product on. I'm going to put the filler primer on the left side, and I'll do the sandable on the right side. So I'm going to get the fan turned on here, throw my mask on. I'm gonna spray this, I'm gonna give some commentary and let you know how the filler primer sprays and lays. So let's get things going. All right, so at first glance here, I see it has an old school spray nozzle. It's not like some of the others that I've used that have that nice fan blue tip. So we'll see how that comes into play. I can see here from my first couple sprays, it definitely comes out a little bit thicker. The nozzle is very, very stiff. My finger got tired towards the end of this. I noticed that my humidity was a little bit higher today, and on some of the overhangs, it got kind of dry, so that was probably dealt with the humidity. So it leads me to believe this could be a water-based primer, but it definitely laid on thick, sprayed on pretty good, minus the stiff nozzle. So let's go ahead and take a look at the model after it's been sprayed, and I'll give you my thoughts. A couple things that I noticed, the nozzle is very stiff. I don't really like that. When I was spraying and I kind of went up like this, to get the top, you can see that some drips occurred. Don't know what that's about. It is a very wet primer. You can see here that it's still incredibly wet. There isn't a very large odor, which leads me to believe there aren't a ton of heavy solvents in here. This very well could be a water-based primer. You know, it does say, you know, contains ketones. So things like acetone are present, but acetone is literally in every can. If things like paint thinners and acetones weren't in it, they would never dry. If they were strictly water-based, it would take hours to dry. So it seems very similar to the Rust-Oleum already. I'm going to do another coat of this just because it's definitely going to need more. So, you know, really what I'm doing with this, you know, it says apply 2 or more light coats. So I'm trying to follow this as much as we can. When you're doing filler primer with no putty, you're going to have to do way more coats than what they tell you, you know, on the bottle. So I'm going to let this sit. I believe the can says in about 15 minutes, do another coat, and then let this sit 30 minutes. We'll see how it does. So I'm gonna let this dry, see what happens. All right, so it's been about 35 minutes. You can definitely kind of see here from that just how much is filled in there. That's actually a really good shot. So it definitely has some high build capability here. It's hard to judge filler primer when you're just spraying it on because it's just mimicking what is underneath. You're still going to see things like layer lines and things like that, but sanding them down and smoothing them out, that's really what matters. It doesn't feel squishy. I never really like going too crazy with the machine. The idea is for the filler primer to fill in, and sometimes the machine just sands so much off right away, it completely eliminates a lot of the work that you're doing. So I am going to kind of do both. I'm going to try it by hand and with the machine here. Some hand sanding on this. I am going to be using a foam interface here, which I highly recommend. This doesn't say anything about any sort of grit. I wouldn't recommend going too crazy. 220 should be okay. I'm going to alternate between 220 and 320 and see how it goes. Get outside and do some sanding and do some sweating. Once allowing the primer to sit for the recommended time, I went ahead and started sanding it with a foam interface pad in 220. Of course, we gave it a little bit more time after I moved everything around and set everything up. It was actually probably closer to 50-55 minutes. But right away here, it's already clumping. So the primer feels very soft. Although it says it can be dry or wet sanded at 30 minutes, I don't know if I believe that just from what's going on with the sandpaper here. It's clumping up, it's gouging, definitely some sanding scratches and things like that. So that's something where we're going to have to go to a lighter sandpaper and kind of level that off. So I grabbed some 320 here, and I'm going to try to smooth this out with 320 or maybe prevent the clumping. But even with the 320 here, it's still clumping. It's still building up. It still feels soft. Yes, it is smoothing out, but you're kind of compromising your sandpaper here. All that primer builds up, and you're just going to end up throwing that out. So I even went up to 400, and still the same result was the same. I tried being a little bit more delicate, being a little bit more gentle. It still happened. Yes, you can wet sand this, but I don't like doing that because then you're just introducing more water, another solute, and that could prolong the curing process. So you could get it all smooth and in your mind think it's okay, but then you put paint on that has stronger solvents, and then you get that wrinkling, you get that crinkling, you get adverse reactions when your primer isn't fully cured. So to me, the best way to do it is to dry sand it. That's how you're going to know the full integrity of the primer. I went over and tested it with the palm sander to see how it did with the palm sander, and same thing here. It started clumping up right away. It just started building up, kind of slowing down the process. And what even happened here is the palm sander, even with a foam pad in between, it really chewed up this model on numerous parts of it. On any curved area there, it just started stripping the primer right off, kind of taking away from what we want to do. But early on, this is a very, definitely something that you want to be careful with this, maybe give it more time. Delicate, gentle primer. So let me go ahead and try to smooth this out by hand. We'll take a look at it and I'll give you my thoughts. We kind of seen that it really didn't matter what sandpaper you used. It still had that clumping effect, very similar to a past filler primer I tested in Rust-Oleum. So that leads me to believe this is more of a water-based filler primer. Dry times are going to be a little bit longer, and it is going to be a little bit more delicate. Now, when I went over it with the palm sander, kind of chewed it up in a couple areas, and there's even still some areas right here where we can see that the it's a delicate primer, so it can get chewed up more easily. This is something where you're either going to have to give it longer to dry and cure, or spend more time pyramiding your sandpaper, meaning you're going to have to start at 220 and go 320 and 400. You know, you can use a machine, but you may create more work for yourself. It does have a very good filling ability, I will say that. And I'd even mentioned that about Rust-Oleum. It fills really good. It's just, I hate the way you have to sand it and how long it takes. Don't know how much different the sandable is going to be, but we're going to do this side now. Let's get this guy in the paint tent here and get some coats on it. So now applying the sandable primer, and not much has changed. It still has that old school nozzle, so a little bit stiff there. Not really a fan of that. On a positive note, this primer did lay very even. It wasn't quite as thick as the filler primer, but there were no runs. There were none of those dry marks that I mentioned about that were kind of affected from higher humidity, so it laid really even. It did have a little bit of a wet look there. I always get nervous about that with primers because I always question how long they're going to dry, but it did lay very even, so hopefully this is a product that we're going to be able to sand very easy. I went ahead and did the second coat after about 15 minutes just to give us good filling capabilities, which early on it definitely looked like it did. You can see here from that line, just like the filler primer, it does have that high build capability, which is pretty awesome. But what I noticed then is when I took the tape off, look at how all the primer got pulled off. This is a prime identifier of something not being cured. There is a big difference between something being dry and something being cured. So again, that filler primer, it says 6-hour cure time, where the sandable is saying 1. Something you definitely want to consider when comparing these two products here. Everything looks pretty good on this mask here. I just have to get a couple more things set up, and then we can go ahead and start sanding and see just how well the sandable primer does when we put it to the same test. So now testing the sandable primer, I went at it again with 220, but this time around, I did not use a foam interface pad to start off, just to see how well it sanded down, to see if there's any clumping or anything like that. And to my surprise, there is absolutely no clumping. So that is a very, very good sign. You can see here on the sandpaper. But let me try this real quick here. So I'm going to go back to the filler primer and try to knock down those areas that got pulled off with the tape to see just how it holds up. I'm not using a foam interface pad, and look, it right away, it's clumping. Now keep in mind, this is well over an hour that this is sat, and we are sanding it and it's still clumping. I went on those curve edges. Look how bad that built up, even worse without a foam interface pad. So when you are using delicate primers, a soft interface pad is so essential. But you can see here that the sandable primer is not a delicate primer, and we're actually able to sand this whole thing by hand with no clumping, minimal gouging, and really great results. I went ahead and then grabbed the palm sander here, and I went at that right in front of here just to give you the results. I tried to use the bottom of the sandpaper where it was clean. The top was where I used the filler primer. That's all gunked up. The bottom, I used the sandable. No buildup, no nothing. Work absolutely great. I even then went at it with the curved areas just to try to work it on there. But even with the excessive agitation and force that the palm sander has, it didn't gouge it up, it didn't damage it, and didn't do anything like the filler primer did. It reacted completely different, filling in those layer lines, smoothing it out, doing a really great job. Let me give you a better shot of this mask and do some comparisons between the two and give you some more of my thoughts. Looking at the right side of the mask here with the sandable primer, completely different product here. You know, on the left side with the filler primer, we are clearly dealing with something that is water-based. It's very soft, it's very delicate. It definitely needs, in my opinion, more time. Very, very, very similar to Rust-Oleum. The sandable primer though, it sands easy. There's very, very minimal clumping. You've seen that I was able to go over it with the palm sander. It didn't chew up any of the areas. Nothing happened with the sandable primer like it did with the filler primer. This is just 220 with the machine and then touched up by hand, and there are very few deep gouges. There's some around the curved area, which, you know, that's gonna happen. How much worse it is on here. You know, some of these really, really, really deep ones here, not quite as bad on the sandable primer side. I think in reality is these are just relabeled products. I would not be completely shocked if I was able to find an MSDS sheet, and I would say 90% of this is probably sent from Rust-Oleum. This I'm not sure. This, like I said, it on the label it had more warning saying it contained more solvent, so I'd say this is more of a solvent blend, similar to a Duplicolor filler primer. That's my take on it. It's not quite as fast as something like Bondo or U-Pol, but it is, I think, similar to a Duplicolor. Those would be my my main analogies for it. And do some touch-ups that are needed on the mask, get it all cleaned up, and then give you my final thoughts on these two primers. All right, well, there you have it. There is a look and a head-to-head comparison at both the Iron Armor filler primer and the sandable primer. It was getting way too hot outside, so I had to move everything inside. Obviously, I have some things to cover, so I wanted to make sure I was in a nice, cool area. Let's kind of talk about these filler primers. Obviously, both of them are going to have some pros and cons. You know, starting with the Iron Armor filler primer, the main thing is the price point, $5.99. It is a great price point. I've seen other filler primers in local stores that aren't even that great, that are $7.99, $8.99, and you have your more medium and higher end filler primers that can get anywhere from $17.99 for the U-Pol 1K, and then I've seen Duplicolor $20 at O'Reilly's, which is just absolutely insane. A lot of times Harbor Freight will run coupons and things like that, so you can get it even cheaper. Speaking of Harbor Freight, again, another pro is the local availability. You can just drive down the road to a Harbor Freight and pick these up, which is really great. The filling ability, it does have really good filling ability. I'm not going to knock that. It did fill things in great on the mask. Overall, did a pretty good job. So as far as getting rid of PLA lines, you know, without even the use of any putty, you know, it did a pretty good job. The cons. So I had mentioned this is very similar to a Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 filler primer. If any of you guys have watched my filler primer test 1 and 2, you will know that I absolutely cannot stand Rust-Oleum, and it proved to be one of the lower tier filler primers. This is very similar, okay? A lot of times companies will relabel things, and I kind of mentioned that in the video. They will take their formula and tweak 1 or 2 things and sell that formula and sell that product to a company like Iron Armor. They put their label on it, and that's what you have. This is definitely a water-based filler primer, so dry time and durability wise, it's not going to be that great. So we gave it that 30-minute window, and yes, it sanded, but it was clumping up the sandpaper, slowing the process down. We had to use lighter grits on top of it. So again, this is time consuming, very similar to a Rust-Oleum or a Krylon, a water-based filler primer. Oh, and then just how delicate it was, you know, 220, you know, gouged it really, really bad. So again, we're having to take time to use lighter grits on top of it to get it to that smoothness that we want. It's definitely very, very similar to Rust-Oleum 2-in-1. Is it as bad? No. It's a pretty good primer if you're not like rushed for a project, or if you have multiple pieces where you can spray it and really let them sit. Is it a bad filler primer? No. It's not going to be my go-to. A big con that I found too is, you know, I stated in the beginning of the video, you know, I had to call 6 stores and travel almost an hour to get this. So although it is carried at Harbor Freight, I don't know why the availability was limited in my area. 1 out of 6 stores actually had it in stock. So how available is this product in your market? I don't know. There's only one way to find out. It's locally available. It's got a low price point. It does do a good job at filling. But as far as time management wise, you know, it is going to consume some time with having to do additional sanding, wait times, things like that. But again, I can see why people are drawn by this. It did do a decent job. So now moving on to the sandable, the pros and cons. To be completely honest, right out of the gate, there's really not a lot of cons for this. It dried fast, it sanded easy. I even did a tape test and it didn't pull off. Completely different product. You know, at first I thought when I seen this stuff online, I'm like, hey, it's probably literally the same product. They just added a couple things here and there and changed the label. No. Knowing that Iron Armor is kind of a new company, it's probably a relabeled product similar to the U-Pol sandable or maybe something on the Duplicolor. No, in between 35 and 45 minutes, it's sanded with no problem. There was no gouging. I did it with just 220 and there was very minimal gouging. I went over it with the palm sander. It didn't chew it up or anything. So it was kind of the complete opposite of the filler primer, but it still filled in absolutely great. A price point on this, again, $6.99. It is $1 more than the filler primer, but I would gladly spend the extra $1 and use the sandable versus the filler primer. I'm actually going to finish this mask with the sandable, just to kind of show you guys. That'll be a future video. I'm going to do a cool rub and buff effect on this. Yeah, the sandable I really like, and what's weird too is when I was testing some of the U-pulls, I noticed that the sandable primers, it kind of went through the product really fast, but comparing these two, it's pretty similar. I didn't use a ton of product on these. I did about 3 to 4 coats, and they're pretty much equal. So that is another pro that I will say. Only complaint I had with both of these is the nozzle on these. My finger got really tired. This is a very stiff nozzle. Doing big things like armor or droids or something. I mean, I literally had to take a break in between. So I had a number of people commenting on this product on my other videos. So I figured I'd go out and try it. Hopefully this sheds some light on these primers here. Hopefully the video helped. If it did, of course, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave me a comment in the comment section. I know I mentioned some other primers here in the video. Likely what's going to happen is I'm going to do a filler primer test version 2. Take the winner from 1, which is Bondo, and I'll probably add the U-pulls in, the Raptor 1K, and I'll probably even throw in the sandable. This is a channel where when you guys comment and give me this feedback, I want to give you guys, you know, not only videos that aren't done out there, but videos that you want to see. So be on the lookout for updates of filler primer test version 2, and probably try out some of these and see how they fare head to head. I want to thank you guys for taking your time out of the day and watching this video. Like I said, if you did enjoy it, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If you have questions on anything, go ahead and drop me a comment. And of course, if you do enjoy all things 3D printing, cosplay, Marvel, DIY, and more, go ahead and click the subscribe button because I got a lot more videos just on the horizon. That's it for this video, guys. Go ahead and check out Iron Armor. If you've tried these out or have any feedback, go ahead and drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Go and enjoy the 4th of July. Why are you watching this video? It's the 4th of July. Go blow stuff up, just not your hand, because then you won't be able to sand and try out products like this. Have a great 4th of July, guys. I greatly appreciate you watching this video. Make sure to click that subscribe button and come back and see me. And until next time, DW out. Later.